I'm 25 years old, and for almost a year now, I've been teaching second grade. My name is Charlotte. Until recently, my life was drawn within familiar, almost childish contours. I lived in my parents' house on a quiet street in Minneapolis, in the very house I grew up in the very bedroom with the faded purple walls I had so fervently repainted at 14, trying to assert my rapidly maturing self. Before we continue, I'm very curious. What country are you from, dear listeners? Write in the comments where you're listening from. And now, get comfortable. We're starting. Returning to the family nest after college initially seemed like a sensible and even cozy compromise. I paid my share, $600 monthly for rent, reliably bought groceries, and tried to help with the housework. My hands knew the way to the vacuum cleaner and ironed the laundry. I helped my mom arrange knickknacks for garage sales. And in these simple rituals, there was a certain peace. The plan seemed clear and straightforward. Live at home for a year or two, save a modest capital, enough for the first month's rent and a security deposit, on my own little nest, and quietly, without upheaval, start an independent life. Nothing complicated. But to understand why this simple scheme collapsed, you need to know about my sister, Jenna. She's 32, 7 years older than me, and from the moment I was born, she has consistently resided at the zenith of our parents' adoration. Always, without a single exception. Jenna managed to drop out of college twice. The first time, she grandly declared that her chosen major was stifling her creative spirit. The second time, she complained about the professor's excessive demands. Both times, my parents meekly paid her entire tuition, and both times that considerable money simply evaporated the moment she left. Meanwhile, to save up for my own education, I worked for 2 years behind the counter at Subway, steeped in the smell of yeast dough and pickles. I couldn't start studying until I was 20 because I had to save every cent. But even that austerity wasn't enough, and I had to take out federal student loans to cover the remaining balance. My parents never once offered me help with anything. Jenna, in turn, never held down a job for longer than 6 months. For this, she always had a masterfully crafted excuse. The boss was a tyrant, the duties were mind-numbingly boring, the colleagues were unbearable. My parents never found her at fault. Instead, they continued to bail her out of every financial pit. They paid for her apartments, repaired her perpetually breaking car, paid her parking tickets, and meekly handed out cash at her first request. I never voiced anything about the glaring injustice of it all. What was the point? They had made their choice in favor of the one who was more important to them many years ago. And so, I led my quiet, measured life. I taught second graders, returned home by 3 in the afternoon, checked piles of simple exercises, planned lessons. Everything was calm. Not impressive, but tolerable. But one evening, everything changed. It was the most ordinary Tuesday. Mom had made spaghetti with meat sauce for dinner. We were sitting at the table, the usual scent of garlic and tomatoes hanging in the air, when Jenna walked into the dining room. A strange, triumphant smile played on her face, as if she was guarding some great secret that was about to turn our world upside down. "I have news," she announced, sitting down on a chair and helping herself to pasta without any invitation. "I'm pregnant." A deathly silence fell over the room. I stared at my parents, expecting an outburst of anger, sober questions, reproaches. After all, Jenna had been dating some guy she barely knew for maybe 2 months. She had no job, no stable income. She was already barely making ends meet. Yet, instead of a shadow of worry, my mother's face suddenly lit up with a radiance of immense joy. "Oh my God, baby," she exclaimed. "That's wonderful." My father jumped up from his seat and hugged Jenna. "Congratulations, dear," he said. "That's amazing news." I sat motionless, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth, in complete and utter bewilderment. "And what about the father?" I finally squeezed out, feeling my voice betray me with a tremble. Jenna just shrugged lightly, as if we were talking about a neighbor's cat that had wandered into the wrong yard. "He's out of the picture. He just vanished when I told him." I held my breath, waiting for at least some shadow of sober assessment of the situation to flicker in my parents' eyes. A single word, a hint of understanding that raising a child alone, without a penny to your name and not a single career prospect, was, to put it mildly, a reckless endeavor. But it didn't come. "We'll help you with everything," came instead, and Mom's voice was full of sweet tenderness as she reached across the table to touch Jenna's fingers. "You're not alone in this. We need to start planning," my father immediately picked up, and his tone held a businesslike excitement. "You'll need a place to live. The basement." I watched as these words, like magical spells, began to construct a new reality. "We could renovate it, turn it into a proper apartment for you and the baby, with its own little kitchen," Mom continued rapturously, her eyes shining with the dream of remodeling. "And we can paint the walls any color you want." And so, over the course of one dinner, all her problems were solved. As always. In the following weeks, the house filled with the buzz of construction. My parents threw themselves headlong into renovating the basement, spending savings from their retirement plan with such ease as if it were pocket change. I heard echoes of their conversations about the cost of new drywall, plumbing for the tiny kitchen, fresh paint and flooring. But they didn't seem the least bit concerned. I tried to stay out of it, not to interfere. This mess was Jenna's creation, and if my parents, in their old habit, wanted to prop her up again, that was their voluntary choice. I naively believed that, at the very least, she would exist in her separate space downstairs, and it wouldn't affect my hard-built life. How wrong I was. About 2 months after the fateful announcement, Mom started making her seemingly offhand remarks. "You should spend more time with your sister, Charlotte. She's going through such a difficult period right now." "I work all day, Mom," I replied, feeling irritation rising. "And in the evenings, I have lesson planning and grading." "She's lonely, Charlotte," she insisted, and her gaze, direct and unambiguous, spoke more eloquently than any words. "She has no one to rely on." And that person, by her silent verdict, was supposed to be me. Soon, my father joined the chorus. He wove his comments into random conversations. "You should be grateful for what you have. Not everyone is as lucky as you." Lucky? As if my job and ability to pay my own way were not the result of effort, but some kind of grace from fate. A privilege, not a basic adult obligation. One evening, returning from work, I froze on the threshold, hearing my parents' voices from the kitchen. I was about to enter, but my name, spoken in that context, made me freeze. "Jenna will need a lot of help when the baby is born," Mom was saying. "We'll help," Dad replied. "You, me, and Charlotte." And then came the phrase that pierced my consciousness like an icy needle. "Especially Charlotte. She has no children of her own, no boyfriend, no serious commitments besides work. She finishes every day at 3. The perfect time to help with the baby." I stood in the hallway, paralyzed. They weren't just making plans for Jenna anymore. They were already mapping out my life, my time, my evenings, without my knowledge, without my consent. I quietly went to my room without saying a word. After that, Jenna started appearing more and more often. She would come for dinner, describe in detail and with relish all the hardships of her delicate condition. And then her gaze would stop on me, and she would say, with a slight sneer, "You're so lucky to have a stable job and not have to go through all this." Yes, incredibly lucky. Everything I had was earned by sweat, not fallen from the sky. And by the 5th month of pregnancy, it became even more unbearable. One evening, as we sat around the kitchen table with steaming pizza, Mom placed her napkin with the air of someone declaring martial law. Her face was carved from stone. "We need to discuss something important. As a family," she began, and a chill settled in my stomach. I put down my half-eaten slice, anticipating the blow. "Jenna will need help with the baby," Mom continued, her words falling into the silence like heavy stones. "Very serious help. And since Charlotte already lives here and is so good with children, she's a teacher, and she's free every day by 3, it's only logical." "What's the point?" I squeezed out, though I understood perfectly well where this was going. "The point is, you will be the nanny," Dad stated, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "You're already here. You have experience. It's the logical choice." "I have a full-time job," I said slowly, trying to maintain composure. I can't take on the care of a newborn on top of teaching. You come home at 3, Mom retorted, as if that were the definitive argument. Most people work until 5 or 6. You have plenty of free time. I have grading, lesson planning, endless emails to parents, I exclaimed, feeling treacherous tears welling up. My work doesn't end when I leave the school building. Jenna looked up from her phone screen for the first time. A faint but venomous smirk played on her lips. I didn't realize helping your own sister was such a huge problem for you, Charlotte. That's not it, my voice trembled. I have my own life, my own responsibilities. This is incredibly selfish. My mother's voice became sharp and cold as steel. We are family. Family helps each other. And let's not forget, Dad added, his gaze becoming intent and calculating. You're not paying market rent. Only $600. The real price would be $1,500. So you essentially owe us. I stared at him in silent shock. I pay rent. I buy my own food. I constantly help around the house. I'm not living here for free. If you're not willing to help your sister, Mom said coldly, then we'll have to reconsider your living arrangements. Maybe it's time to start charging you what you really should be paying. I couldn't believe my ears. They were directly threatening me with financial pressure, blackmailing me with a rent increase to force me into the role of free help for Jenna. I got up from the table without saying another word and left. I slammed my bedroom door so hard the walls shook. The next few days passed in an oppressive, poisonous atmosphere. My parents showered me with a hail of passive-aggressive remarks at every opportunity. Must be nice to have so much free time after work, my father would throw out when I was in my room grading piles of student work. Some people just don't understand family bonds, my mother would mutter, just loudly enough for me to guarantee hear. Jenna, meanwhile, acted as if the house already entirely belonged to her. She showed up when she wanted, scattered her things, helped herself to my groceries without asking. I bought organic food from Whole Foods, trying to eat right, and Jenna would just take whatever was in the fridge. One day, coming home, I found her finishing my strawberries right from the container. That's mine, I said, my voice shaking with helpless rage. Mom said I can have anything, she shrugged. Don't be so dramatic, Charlotte. Before I could find any response, Mom appeared in the kitchen. Charlotte, she said in an icy tone, I demand you apologize to your sister right now. You're making her feel unwelcome in her own home. You need to learn to share. I just turned around and walked away. Arguing was utterly pointless. A week later, the oppressive atmosphere in the house thickened to the limit. My parents held another family council, where they announced with a businesslike air that with Jenna's impending move and the baby's birth, their financial expenses would increase significantly, and therefore, if I refused to participate in childcare, they would have to raise my rent to the market rate of $1,500. My father, with the air of an unyielding accountant, even showed me a spreadsheet he had made in Excel. He ran his finger over the columns of numbers, explaining in detail how much diapers cost, how much formula would be, and how Jenna would need help paying bills. At that moment, looking at those cold, calculating numbers, I realized with ultimate clarity it was time for me to leave. My savings were modest, but I remembered my colleague Madison mentioning once that her friend in St. Paul urgently needed a roommate. I texted her that same evening. The next day, Madison called back. The room was $850 a month, including utilities. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. I agreed without a second thought. My secret preparation for escape began. I carefully packed my things into large black trash bags and hid them in the trunk of my Honda Civic under an old blanket. I photographed all my property in the room, furniture, TV, laptop, all the electronics, recording the serial numbers in case of possible future disputes. My plan was simple: to leave quietly while everyone was busy, leaving an explanatory note on the kitchen counter. Clean, simple, no unnecessary scenes. But I made one fatal mistake. I left my laptop open in my room, and the draft of that farewell letter remained on the screen. Mom came into my room and read it. She even printed it out. That day, returning from work, I found both parents in the living room. My father was clutching the printout in his hand as if it were material evidence. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice trembling with anger. "You're planning to abandon us?" Lying was pointless. "I found a new place. I'm moving out at the end of the month." Mom burst into tears, streams flowing down her face. "How could you do this to us? To your sister? She needs you, Charlotte." "She needs a free nanny," I retorted coldly, "and I have no intention of volunteering for that role." My father's face turned crimson. "We gave you so much letting you live here. We helped you get on your feet after college." "I pay rent." My voice broke. "I buy my own food. I've been taking care of myself since I was 20. I am not your backup plan for Jenna's mistakes." Neither of them could find a response. They just stared at me, their gazes full of anger and bitter disappointment. The next few days were filled with unbearable, icy awkwardness. My parents barely spoke to me, except to throw sharp remarks about betraying family bonds. Jenna, meanwhile, acted as if nothing was happening, continuing to fill the basement with boxes from Amazon and baby furniture from Target, claiming more and more space. Finally, moving day arrived. I had arranged for Madison to help me load up. I hoped to slip out early in the morning while Jenna was still asleep and my parents were absorbed in their morning routines. But as soon as I stepped over the threshold with the first box in my hands, my father's shadow appeared in the doorway upstairs. "What the hell is going on?" he roared, his voice, rough with sleep and fury, tearing through the morning silence. He rushed after me onto the driveway, staying on my heels, his shouts following me. "You're abandoning your family, after everything we've done for you." Mom appeared on the threshold in a flowing robe, her face again streaked with tears. "What about Jenna?" she sobbed. "What about the baby?" I kept loading the box into the trunk without stopping. "Jenna and her baby are not my problem," I said, each word an effort. "I can't sacrifice my entire life to fix her mistakes." Then Jenna herself emerged from the basement like a genie. Her hair was disheveled, but a smug, sarcastic smile played on her lips. She seemed to be deriving a perverse pleasure from the whole scene. "Don't worry, Mom," she said in a sweet, poisonous tone. "If Charlotte wants to be selfish, let her go. We don't need a traitor in this family anyway." Madison, silent and determined, helped me load the remaining belongings to the accompaniment of my parents' shouts and accusations of heartlessness. Jenna watched it all like a free show with that same detached curiosity. I got into the car, started the engine, and drove away without looking back once. Madison's apartment greeted me with cleanliness and silence. No shouts, no manipulations, no toxic drama. Just an unfamiliar, deafening peace. However, 3 hours later, my phone exploded with notifications. My parents, aunts, cousins, everyone started calling and texting. Mom had already spread the rumor that I had abandoned my pregnant sister in her time of need. Aunt Linda left an angry voicemail, demanding to know how I could do such a terrible thing. A cousin on WhatsApp called me a selfish bitch. And then I saw Jenna's post on Instagram, a photo of her pregnant belly with a caption about how some people run away instead of helping family, but her child would learn what real love is. I blocked her. I blocked everyone. A week later, Mom showed up at my school during lunch break. She was sobbing, begging to talk, insisting I was destroying the family. The principal had to intervene and politely but firmly ask her to leave. It was deeply humiliating. It was then that I realized I had left a few crucial documents in that house, my Minnesota teaching license and W-2 tax forms. 2 weeks after moving out, I went back there with Madison and our colleague Olivia for support and as a witness. My former room was unrecognizable. Jenna had mixed her things with mine. Her shapeless clothes were in the dresser, and tiny items from Bye Bye Baby were scattered on the desk. She appeared in the doorway with a Starbucks cup, looking serene and pleased. "It's hard to tell what's yours and what's mine now," she shrugged, "so I guess you shouldn't take anything." I took out my phone and showed her the photos I had taken earlier. "This is my room before you invaded it." I opened the folder with the files, and here's a complete list of everything I bought, with the electronic serial numbers. At that moment, my parents appeared in the room. My father, turning crimson, threatened to call the police if I took anything. Go ahead, I challenged him. I'll be happy to explain to the officers that my sister illegally occupied my room and took my property. It's a direct violation of tenant rights in Minnesota. That shut him up instantly. With the help of Madison and Olivia, I packed all my things. When Jenna tried to claim that my MacBook was hers, I showed her the receipt from Best Buy and the serial number. The only one stealing here is you, I said to her, looking straight into her suddenly deadened eyes. You tried to steal my time, my freedom, and turn me into your free servant. But that's not going to happen. I walked out of there with all my things and never went back. It's been 6 months since my escape. Half a year of absolute blessed silence and peace of mind in the apartment with Madison. No draining drama, no corrosive guilt, no one demanding I sacrifice my life, my goals, and my time to fix the consequences of someone else's irresponsible choices. During this time, Jenna had the baby, a girl. I found out through random family rumors that trickled through a few mutual acquaintances, not firsthand. I made no attempt to contact them, and to be perfectly honest, I wasn't very interested. From what those rare relatives who kept in touch said, everything went exactly the way I had predicted. My parents took on the burdens of round-the-clock care for Jenna's daughter. They got up for night feedings, changed diapers, and were completely exhausted and drained, mentally and physically. Jenna didn't even try to find a job. She excused herself by being too exhausted from motherhood. Though rumors had it, she spent most of her time on TikTok and Instagram, showcasing carefully curated photos of the baby and ignoring the pros of real parental duties. She still lived in my parents' basement. The renovation, started with such enthusiasm, was never finished. They had spent the lion's share of their retirement savings on it, and at some point, the money simply ran out. So Jenna lived in the damp, unfinished basement with a perpetually crying infant, and my parents were desperately trying to keep this shaky structure afloat. The very burden they had tried to impose on me, they now had to carry themselves. My parents repeatedly tried to make contact. At first, their messages were full of rage, accusations of ingratitude, of abandoning the family in its most difficult moment. When anger didn't work, they switched to manipulation. Their messages began to carry notes about how I was needed by the baby, how I was missing my chance to be a good aunt, that families should stick together. Their last tactic was sending photos of my niece with sentimental captions about how every child needs a loving aunt. I blocked them on Facebook, set up filters in Gmail so their emails went straight to the trash. I was done with their toxic games for good. One evening, Madison asked if I felt even a twinge of guilt. Not a bit, I replied without a shadow of doubt. Not at all. They had a choice. They could have respected my boundaries. They could have simply asked me to babysit sometimes like normal people do, maybe a few hours on the weekend, and I would have agreed. I love children. I didn't become a teacher by accident. But they didn't ask. They demanded. They threatened to raise my rent to force me into the role of a full-time, unpaid nanny. They tried to blackmail me into giving up my entire life for Jenna's mistake. So no, I don't feel guilty. And I truly didn't. The point is, if my parents had been reasonable, none of this would have happened. If they had treated me like a living person with my own life and not as a built-in solution to Jenna's problems, I would have helped. I would have been a good aunt. One night, late, over a glass of wine, in a state of sentimental weakness, I did give in to an impulse. I opened a new draft and started typing. But then my fingers froze over the keys and I asked myself a sober question. What would actually change if I broke the silence? Would they apologize, admit they were wrong? Would they respect my boundaries in the future? The answer was obvious and harsh. No. They would see it as my capitulation, take it as a green light for new demands. So I deleted the unsent letter and double-checked that their numbers were securely blocked. From Aunt Linda, who remained one of the few links to that world, I heard that my parents hadn't given up trying to reach me. They, according to her, constantly asked about me and continued to look for loopholes for contact. Once they even dared to come to my old school, but I, anticipating something like that, had warned the administration in advance, and they were politely but firmly not allowed past the lobby. Aunt Linda never judged my departure. She, unlike the others, understood. Your parents are struggling, she told me during one of our rare, heartfelt conversations. But it's not your fault. They made their own decisions all these years. And Jenna? I asked, without much hope. As always, posts on social media, playing the mother of the year, while dumping all the real work on our parents. It sounded painfully familiar. They keep asking me to persuade you to come back, Aunt Linda sighed. But I tell them straight, you're an adult and you make your own choices. If they want a relationship with you, they need to start with apologies and real changes in behavior. Thank you, I whispered sincerely. I'm proud of you, Charlotte. You've found the strength to stand up for yourself. That takes real courage. Her words were a balm to my soul. Because sometimes, in the silence of the night, doubts still visited me. Did I do the right thing? Maybe I should have just accepted it and helped. But then the memories of those threats, manipulations, the complete and total disrespect for my time, my career, my life, would flood back in all their vividness. And I would again clearly realize defending your boundaries is not selfishness. It was a necessity, an act of self-preservation. And now, 6 months after my departure, my life is better than ever. I have my own inviolable space, a great relationship with my roommate, a job I love, and no draining family drama. I made it clear to my parents through Aunt Linda that I have no intention of restoring the relationship until they acknowledge their guilt and demonstrate real change. I still teach second grade, and this year I even got a raise. The principal nominated me for an award for outstanding teaching achievements. I didn't win, but the nomination itself was a pleasant recognition of my professional merits. Madison and I got along wonderfully. Sometimes we cooked dinner together, watched movies on weekends, had the most ordinary, relaxed conversations without a hint of guilt or manipulation. Sometimes her boyfriend would come over, and we'd spend time together, easily and peacefully. I could finally save money properly, without threats of rent increases, and without Jenna shamelessly consuming my groceries. My savings account finally started to grow, and I was already allowing myself to dream of my own, albeit small, apartment in a year or two. Last week, one of my students gave me a drawing. It depicted me with a wide smile in front of our classroom. At the top, the child had written in purple pencil, "Best teacher in the world." I hung this masterpiece on the fridge and felt tears welling up in my eyes. This was what truly mattered. Making a positive difference in children's lives, having a purpose that gives meaning, building a life I can be proud of. Sometimes I'm asked if I regret how things turned out. The answer is no, not one bit. Because this whole difficult experience taught me a simple but fundamental truth. Boundaries matter. Your time matters. Your life matters. My parents saw in me only a convenient solution to Jenna's problems. Not a person with her own goals and the right to her own path. They didn't ask me to help. They demanded it. And when I said no, they tried to break me with threats. Family bonds should not be built on a foundation of coercion and sacrifice, where one person is obliged to drown so another can stay afloat. If my parents had shown even a shadow of common sense and basic respect, everything could have been completely different. If they had simply suggested, "Hey, Charlotte, could you sometimes babysit on Saturday morning so Jenna can get some rest?" I would have agreed without a second thought. I love children with all my heart. That's the very essence of my profession, my calling. But they didn't need help for a few hours. They demanded that I become a full-time, unpaid nanny, taking on a second, unpaid shift after my own work at school. They expected me to meekly give up my evenings, my weekends, my entire personal life and ambitions. And when I found the courage to say no, they tried to punish me with financial blackmail, ultimately forcing me to flee my own home. And now, looking back, I don't feel the slightest guilt for my escape. Last night, Aunt Linda called again. Her voice was tired when she told me that Jenna still wasn't working, still living in the damp basement, and still shifting all childcare onto my parents' shoulders. The baby was already 6 months old, and my mother and father, according to her, looked like they had aged 10 years in that time. "They were asking about you again," Aunt Linda said, but I, as always, told them straight. "You're doing well, and if they really want a dialogue, they should start with sincere apologies. And, I asked, already knowing the answer. Nothing. Your father again stated that they have nothing to apologize for, that you're the one who abandoned the family, not them. This predictability no longer evoked anger or resentment in me, just a bitter weariness. My parents would never admit their wrongdoing, because that would mean reevaluating our entire shared history, admitting that for my entire conscious life they had treated me as a second-class person, unconditionally putting Jenna first and expecting me to meekly accept this hierarchy. "And how are you, Charlotte? Really?" Aunt Linda asked with warmth in her voice. "Honestly?" I smiled into the phone, and the smile was genuine. "I'm fine. Truly. I'm happy. My life is finally the way I want it to be." "That's good. You deserve that," she replied, and there wasn't a hint of deceit in her words. After finishing the call, I sank onto the sofa, letting my mind's eye run through the recent chain of events, the humiliating threats, the sophisticated manipulations, the oppressive guilt, the secret escape with belongings packed in black bags, and the resolute press of the block button on my phone. An outsider might think I overreacted, that I should have just helped, because that's what family does. But those people have never lived with the constant, soul-gnawing feeling of being a less important, less valuable person. They haven't seen parents pay for their sister's college twice while you stand behind a Subway counter to save up for your one chance. They haven't watched them repair her car and pay her rent while you learn to handle absolutely everything on your own from a young age. They don't understand what it means, after finally achieving stability and recognition in your profession, to be faced with an attempt to turn you into free help. I stood up for myself. I outlined and defended my boundaries. I chose my own mental well-being over their selfish demands, and I haven't regretted it for a second. My phone vibrated softly, interrupting the flow of thoughts. A message from Madison glowed on the screen. "Order Thai for dinner?" I sent a short yes and smiled again. This was my life now, simple, calm, devoid of destructive drama. A life in which I made my own choices and no longer apologized for setting the rules. My parents and Jenna are hostages of the situation they created with their own hands. They chose manipulation over respect, demands over requests, and now they have to deal with the consequences of that choice. And I am finally free. I no longer need their approval or recognition. All I need is to keep living my life on my terms, surrounded by people who truly respect me.